A very good morning to all the excellencies, honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aniket and I feel honored to welcome you all on behalf of TERI and the World Bank to the thematic track of the World Sustainable Development Summit 2022 titled Achieving Sustainable Development Goals Through Carbon and Climate Finance, Forest Sector Experiences from Global South. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items. All the participants will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's speakers by typing their questions into the chat section. The participants may send in their questions at any time during the discussion. We will collect them and the respective speakers will address them during the designated question and answer session. For the benefit of the participants, I will go through the structure of today's discussion. We will begin by the welcome address, followed by the inaugural address and remarks on today's topic and vote of thanks for the inaugural session. Once we are done with it, I will call upon the chair who will be moderating the panel discussion. The panel discussion will begin with a presentation on the topic, followed by the discussion by the panelists and question answer session. Now, without further ado, I would request Dr. Jv Sharma to deliver the welcome address. Dr. Sharma is a 1983 batch retired IFS officer from Uttar Pradesh cadre who is presently leading the Land Resources Division at TERI as director. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aniket. Good morning to all. On behalf of the Energy and Resources Institute and the World Bank, I welcome Shri Chandra Prakash Goyal, Director General of Forest and Special Secretary to the Government of India, Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change for accepting our request to deliver the inaugural speech for the event on achieving sustainable development goals through carbon and climate finance, forestry sector experiences from Global South at TERI's flagship annual event World Summit on Sustainable Development. I'm also delighted to welcome Mr. Pablo Cesar uh, and Dr. S.S. Negi, Vice Chairman, Uttarakhand Rural Development and Migration Commission, and the former Director General of Forest and Special Secretary to the Government of India, who will be chairing the panel. Anna Hannington, Environment Specialist, the World Bank, Mr. Anupam Joshi, Senior Environment Specialist, the World Bank, Mr. Ashish Tiwari, Secretary Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of Uttar Pradesh, and Mr. Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, Director VNV Advisory. I also welcome Mr. Piyush Dogra, Senior Environment Expert, the World Bank, Dr. Yogesh Gokhale, Senior Fellow TERI, my colleague, and all the distinguished participants who have joined us for this discussion. Forest and trees are treated primarily as a social and environmental resource and only secondarily as a commercial resource, particularly in our country. They are crucial self-regenerating ecological entities that provide a wide range of functions that aid in human survival and quality of life. Not only they help in the mitigating climate change, but also help in generating livelihood for the people who live in and around forest. Forest and tree directly contributes towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, 13, 14, and 15, and also indirectly contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal 1, 2, 8, 10, 12, and 17. So we can understand that how important forests and trees are for achieving and obtaining Sustainable Development Goal. However, in the last few decades, forest areas are subject to the degradation due to the ever-increasing demand of the forest resources like fuel wood, fodder, and non-timber forest produce. Today, most of the wood requirements are fulfilled from tree outside forests, particularly agro-forestry and farm forestry practices, where the farmers grow trees on their farmlands. Increase in the tree and forest cover as per the ISFR 21 report is imperative for the attainment of the NDC goals, and people involved in the increasing tree cover needs to be motivated and compensated, and carbon finance can be explored as a potential option. Carbon market has surged after the decision taken during the Paris Agreement and in COP26 at Glasgow. Since the expiry of the Kyoto Protocol, compliance market is at a standstill, which has led to the emergence of the voluntary market in a large way, which is filling the gap of the compliance market, particularly in the forestry sector, both for conservation as well as afforestation and reforestation approach. TERI is implementing more than 10 carbon finance projects in the country under the agroforestry. In the TERI is implementing for the state of Uttar Pradesh, state of Gujarat, and state of Punjab to incentivize the effort of the farmers for growing trees on their farmlands under agroforestry. TERI is also implementing four carbon finance projects in tiger reserves in Dudhwa Tiger Reserves, Uttar Pradesh, Panch Tiger Reserve, Maharashtra, Sundarban Tiger Reserve, West Bengal, and Periyar Tiger Reserve in Kerala, and also 25 one panchayat for incentivizing conservation effort of the communities who are assisting and helping the state administration for conservation of the forest and enhancing the carbon sequestration for 25 one panchayats in state of Uttarakhand. We are organizing this event to apprise the government, scientific communities, and the people at large and other stakeholders regarding the importance of the forest and trees in achieving sustainable development goals and also mitigating climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving you. Thank you very much, sir, for giving your valuable insights on today's topic of discussion. Now may I request Mr. C.P. Goel, Director General of Forest and Special Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India, to enlighten us a little more about today's topic through his inaugural address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aniket, and a very good morning to all the dignitaries, colleagues, and friends present in this session. Thank you, TERI, for inviting me to the World Sustainable Development Summit, which I am told is the annual flagship initiative of this institute. And today's theme is very aptly focusing on achieving sustainable development goals through carbon and climate financing. And we will be looking at the forest sector experiences from Global South. As has been told by Dr. Jv Sharma also, at present the forestry sector is facing many challenges, and the complexities have also increased in the current times. As he has already mentioned, fuel wood, fodder, timber, and other direct services provided by the forest to the communities are the major factors that have led to some extent maybe over exploitation of the forest areas also. As far as the forests in India are concerned, around 300 million people are deriving their full or partial livelihood from the forests, and which in a way put the forests and also contribute to their degradation. There is tremendous pressure of but the good aspect is that in spite of all these factors, the forests of India are showing a steady growth, as we have seen from the Indian State of Forest report that has very recently been published, which shows an overall increase of more than 1,500 square kilometers in the forest areas, apart from increase in tree outside forest. But still, we have many miles to cover. Many things has to be done, both for the forestry sector as far as also for the tree outside forest. Regarding the tree cover that has to be increased inside the forest areas. I think the forest areas will not be able to increase in that way that we have been thinking over last so many years. But certainly, tree outside forest is a major area where we can focus our efforts. And as has been rightly pointed out by Dr. Jv Sharma, this agroforestry and farm forestry are the key things that should be looked upon as the major source of carbon sink in the coming years. So as far as I was going through the TERI reports, and I have come to know that around 25 million hectares of area is already under agroforestry, and there is a ample scope of increasing this area up to 200 million hectares. And as has been mentioned in the same report, around 1 hectare of area under agroforestry contributes to around maybe around sequestering of 10 tons of carbon annually. So if this carbon can be monetized and the farmer can earn some income out of that, then certainly this will maybe give him more than the opportunity than he's having as the opportunity cost of raising the trees. And this will be a win-win situation for both the environment and also for the farmers. So as we have learned from the experiences in the recent past, a project has MOU has been done between the farmers of UP and the TERI, where the carbon credits is part of the carbon credits that has been accrued in the farm forestry areas will be given back to the farmers through a mechanism that will be developed by TERI. I think the TERI is doing a very great thing for the agroforestry. If such MOUs can be, they can have these MOUs with the other states also. I think they are at present doing only with the western part of the state. Then maybe if it is increased to the other parts or maybe to the Haryana and Punjab areas also, then certainly it will be a win-win situation for the farmers, and we can certainly look upon increasing the area under agroforestry. And for this, I think the policy intervention and innovative financial mechanisms, institutional strengthening, and capacity building is the utmost thing that is required at present. So one such policy intervention can be the carbon neutrality policy. And I hope that TERI will come forward in formulating this policy, and we from Government of India will be more than willing to support that in whatever way we can. Excuse me. हेलो मैं हाँ मैं एक उसमें हूँ सेशन में अभी करता हूँ सॉरी we have recently, our Prime Minister was there in COP26, and we have promised to create additional sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through forest and tree cover by 2030. So this will, apart from encouraging the farmers for agroforestry, maybe if we are looking into the forest areas also, it will be requiring a huge financial resources if we have to really achieve this target. So carbon financing can be certainly one very good option, which we have not so far maybe in practical sense come up with real solutions for that. It can be realized as a co-benefit for growing more trees and also contribute towards the financial requirements that the country will be requiring for achieving this target. Further, as I already mentioned, it will also increase the farm income, the income of the farmers that will go for agroforestry. So most of these beneficiaries, I think, from carbon finance will be small landholders. So there maybe uniting them under a single roof can be done by a institute or maybe agency that is well versed with the economics of this carbon market. So TERI can be one very good option, and maybe other institutes can also look into it. So this will certainly require a creation of a voluntary market, and also will maybe a national level carbon market or a trading platform where all the forestry projects can come forward, and maybe we can have a win-win situation both for the environment and the agro-forestry developers. So India's announcement to become carbon neutral by 2070 also opens substantial potential for voluntary carbon markets in India. Recently, we have in budget, we have the Honorable Finance Minister has announced about the green bonds also. Maybe we will have to come up with that policy also. Hence, I believe that today's thematic track, achieving sustainable development goals through carbon and climate change, with special focus on forest sector and experiences in global south, is become very relevant in the current scenario. And I sincerely hope that today's discussion will be highly fruitful and will be able to come up with some practical solutions on how to promote domestic forestry carbon markets. And I assure you that if you want any intervention from government side, I will certainly uh, have a role to play, and I will certainly help you out in whatever way I can. So that is all from my side, and thank you very much for inviting me to this session. It will be a great learning experience for in some way or the other. So thank you, and my best wishes for a fruitful discussion during the course of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your inaugural address and broadening our vision for today's discussion. I would now request Mr. Pablo Cesar Benitez, who is currently working as a senior environmental economist at the World Bank, to provide insightful remark on today's topic of discussion. Over to you, sir.
Many thanks, sir, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished speakers, participants, and guests. Director General C.P. Goyal, it's a great opportunity to join you in this panel. I hope we have the opportunity to meet in person anytime soon. The same for you, Dr. Sharma. Thanks again for the invitation. So the session of today deals with achieving sustainable development goals through carbon and climate finance with a focus on the forest sector. As means of introduction to this session, I would like to present the findings of a recent study prepared by the World Bank, which focused on the economic case for nature. And this has very important implications for the financing of the forest sector, but also for the World Bank programming of the next years to come. This study presents the economic rationale for investing in nature, for instance, forests and mangroves, and also recognizes how economies rely on ecosystem services, which are often underpriced. Under this study, we look at two basic questions. The first question is, what happens to economies when nature services decline or collapse? And the second question deals, are there win-win policies which are good for nature and good for economies? You know, this is the ideal policies that we are looking for. And next slide, please. Let me first introduce a little bit the methodology without going much into the details. Those that have done some economics, they may be familiar with what we call computable general equilibrium models. These are economic models that offer a comprehensive way to undertake policy analysis. They model production, consumption, employment, and investment, and they consider also the linkages between sectors, which is very important. What is new in this model, what we have done here, is we're including natural capital and ecosystem services in the analysis, in the model. And we are focusing on 4 ecosystem services. We have looked carefully at timber, at carbon, at pollination services, and also fisheries. Next slide, please. Something important, again, when we do this type of economic analysis is to do things spatially disaggregated, so to look at the spatial aspects. And in this case, what we have been able to do is to divide the world in 37 country units or country groups. In the case of India, of course, it's a single country in the analysis, but in other countries, like small Central American countries, we need to group them. So then otherwise we become too complex in analytical work. But something very important as well is to divide into 18 agroecological zones, because each agroecological zone is going to have different ecosystem services, different carbon sequestration potential, and so on. So if you look in the map of India, for example, you see that we have about 5 agroecological zones in India, more or less. Some of the value added of this methodology compared with the more traditional integrated economic and environmental models are that since this is a global model divided into country regions, we can look at trade interactions. Also, the agroecological zoning enables us to look at the land which is not homogeneous, it's heterogeneous, so things change from one side to the other. And also the model through this methodology enable us to model land use changes so inside the model. So the model is going to help us to determine more or less optimal or theoretical optimal land allocation within countries and regions. Next slide, please. So this is more or less the methodology. Let's go on the actual results. So we look at the first question. Okay, how do we define a scenario of partial ecosystem collapse? If we look at the different ecosystem services, for example, ecosystem collapse for tropical forests is if we think about a widespread conversion of tropical forests to savannas, reduced provision on timber and related ecosystem services in 5 agroecological zones. No, sorry, in agroecological zone number 5 and 6, and in an extent of about 90%. We can also look at other services like pollination. What will be ecosystem collapse in the case of pollination? There can be up to 90% reduction in these wild pollination services which support agricultural yields. The focus in the study was to look at crops that are pollination dependent, like cocoa, coffee, soybeans, palm oil, and avocados. And similar assumptions can be made for marine fisheries. Next slide, please. So what does it come from this study of the partial ecosystem collapse? Who's going to be affected? Well, everybody's going to be affected because, of course, we have trade, we have systems interconnected, and so on. But what the model says is that the regions most impacted are, first of all, the income groups are the low income and lower middle income groups. Globally, the impact on GDP by 2030 of this partial ecosystem collapse is going to be about 2.3%. So we talk about $2.7 trillion. That's a lot of money. But what is worse is that for low-income countries, that will be the share of the impact is going to be minus 10% of the GDP. So that's a huge disaster. But also for lower and middle-income countries, like in the case of India, we talk about minus 7%. If we look for regions, the regions most affected, again, by this ecosystem collapse is going to be Sub-Saharan Africa, but then also South Asia. And the figures for the South Asia, they project about a minus 6% decrease in GDP, given this ecosystem partial collapse. And again, these assumptions are a bit conservative because we don't consider the effects of climate change in the loss of ecosystem. So that would be an additional, percentage point or so on. Let's go now a little bit to the policy discussions. So we know this is a problem. We know how much it costs the economy. If things go wrong, we're talking about trillions of dollars. But what can be the policy solutions? And more important, how we model those solutions in our model. Next slide, please. So there's a range of nature smart policies that can be implemented. But the important is to think about also those nature smart policies which can be win-win. Good for increasing GDP and good for nature. And the good place to start is what we call the core policy options. And this core policy options is really what we're doing in this panel, talking about domestic forest carbon payments. That's very important, and this is going to be discussed here. But also, we have global forest carbon payments because the NDCs are interlinked, there's trade, there are IDMOs and so on. And in the model, it enables us also to look at trade interactions. Something which we know that is important globally is to decouple support to farmers. We're not saying eliminate subsidies, but there are different ways to repurpose subsidies. And this is a long-term objective that we want to do in various regions. Of course, there are multiple political economy challenges, but these are some of the basic policy options. Next slide. What is interesting is that we can combine those options and to evaluate those things together in the model. For example, we combine the subsidy reform with forest carbon payments, which are international, and then we can evaluate what happens. Next slide. And something important to these policies is to add research and development, particularly in this case in the agricultural sector. research and development can help farmers to build resilience, and it has multiple benefits. And there are many ways to do that, but we have modeled in a simplified manner how R&D can be integrated and combined with the rest of the policies. So next slide. So summarizing, so if we evaluate these different policies using our CG model, what do we get? Well, first of all, these core policies, the basic policies, they're all good, very good. We get significant gains in GDP, and we also get significant gains in improving nature, avoiding the natural land conversion and so on. This is what you can see in the graph on P1, P2, and P3. What's more, when we combine these policies with others, between them, but also with R&D, the gains are much more. We can get a much larger impact on GDP, as you see in the second figure, and also you can get more impacts on nature. So this is like all positive. Of course, this is the nice part of the story. There are political economy aspects that need to be evaluated, that's separated. I think with the World Bank, we're also working with the government in those areas. But at least this is all good news, because there's actually a set of policies that can be win-win and can help us to increase GDP and also to be good on nature. Some very quick conclusions and takeaways of this study. I think that the global decline of ecosystem services is a development issue. This is not just about ecologists, it's a core development issue. It's a core issue for economists, ministers of finance and planning. We simply cannot afford the risk of collapse in the services provided by nature, because this is going to hurt the economy. Second, nature-smart policies can reduce the risk of ecosystem services collapse. And there are a range of win-win policies, as we have explored here. Third, nature and climate change agendas are complementary. And it's very important to maximize those synergies in order to get what's called green, resilient, and inclusive development. And this is going to be discussed more in this panel as well, when we look at forest, carbon, and climate finance. And finally, it's very important to stress important to collaborate, for countries to cooperate. Trade is important not only for goods like timber and paper, but also important for ecosystem services. We talk about carbon markets, global carbon markets, ITMOs, and so on. So let's work together in set up those markets and make them work to be efficient and so on. So that's my opening remarks. Again, thanks again for the opportunity, and I look forward to follow up on many of these issues in the future.
Thank you, sir, for providing a concise and interesting view on the subject. Now, I would request Mr. Piyush Dogra, Senior Environmental Specialist, the World Bank, to sum up this very informative discussion with the vote of thanks for the inaugural session.
Thank you, Aniket. Thank you, Aniket. Respected Goel sir, Mr. Pablo from the World Bank, panelists, Mr. Jv Sharma, Director TERI, and ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure to pose a vote of thanks before you. And before I reach to that particular event, let me conclude few points which we have gathered from this discussion with our honorable chief guest, Shri Goel and Mr. Pablo. I believe that the achieving sustainable goal through carbon and climate finance has a great potential, not only for the people, but also for the planet. It has come out now very clearly that carbon financing is a key tool for climate change mitigation and for generating revenues that can finance the attainment of sustainable development goals. The market suggests that the carbon finance can pay for nature conservation and forest protection by pitching in on the costs of monitoring, control, and policing of nature reserves and national parks. Secondly, the crisis of climate change and biodiversity are also required from agriculture and forest sector protection point of view as well. The transition to a low carbon economy is made possible through offset emissions with carbon credit and forest sector development by reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which can contribute concretely to the achievement of sustainable development goals. I agree with the respective chief guest who clearly mentioned about trees outside forest, the policy on agro-forestry, and moving further on this in this direction. And I'm sure the thoughts which Mr. Goyal has shared with us on larger forest sector challenges in India and on carbon financing in particular will help our next technical session to deliberate and bring some deep dives in those aspects. I also thank Mr. Goyal for your inaugural address and thoughtful initiatives which you have posed before us, which we will discuss in the technical session immediately after this inaugural. Our sincere thanks on behalf of TERI and World Bank for your presence, sir. Thank you very much. In addition, I also want to thank a colleague and our senior environmental economist from World Bank, Mr. Pablo Benitez, who brought in the concept of ecosystem services and also the nature smart services, nature smart actions, which are needed now in this case, and probably the instrument of carbon financing, climate mitigation instruments, and overall landscape approach, which we will bring in this sector, would be a great way forward in going further on this. Thanks, Mr. Pablo, for your remarks and also your presentation, which was really helpful for this session. I also thank sincerely the panel who has already joined, and Dr. Negi, who would be the chair of this to join this session, and probably he will take over for the next session. But thanks for your presence, all the panelists and chair who has joined in the inaugural session. On behalf of TERI and World Bank, I also thank the organizers of WSDS, the team which has organized this event, and the background work which has gone deep into organizing this event. This was really a very seamless work which has come forward, and thanks to TERI in organizing this and bringing a resource together for this discussion. At the end, I'll thank all of you for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we have arrived to the most anticipated event of today, which is the panel discussion chaired by Dr. S.S. Negi, former Director General of Forest and Special Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, who is currently serving as the Vice Chairman at Uttarakhand Rural Development and Migration Commission. Our panel comprises of some very interesting and eminent personalities, starting from Ms. Anna Hentinen, Senior Environmental Specialist, the World Bank, Mr. Anupam Joshi, Senior Environmental Specialist, the World Bank, Mr. Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, Director, VNV Advisory, India, Mr. Ashish Tiwari, IFS Secretary, Environment, Forest and Climate Change Department, Government of Uttar Pradesh, Dr. Jv Sharma, Director, Land Resources Division, TERI, and Mrs. Meenakshi Joshi, Joint Director, FSI. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. I welcome all the panelists, and without wasting any time, I request Dr. Yogesh Gokhale for his thematic presentation. Dr. Gokhale, please.
Thank you, sir. I would be going through a quick presentation on the status of carbon markets with respect to the today's topic of panel discussion. So if we look at the carbon markets with little bit of historical perspective, which began in 1997 with signing of Kyoto Protocol, where the compliance market began under UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But post expiry of Kyoto Protocol, the future of the compliance carbon market is in the hands of Conference of Party discussions, and it is under negotiation. Well, the COP26 has come out very clearly that there will be a new agreement for a new market mechanism under compliance market. So, but how it would be, it's still under negotiation. But so far by 2020, there are about 8,000 million CERs, that is certified emission reductions, which have been generated by CDM projects under compliance market, that is clean development mechanism projects. If you see the reforestation projects under compliance market, it's a very small proportion of hardly 70 projects are there, and where India is one of the topmost countries having ARCDM projects in our country. Coming to the voluntary market, which began in around early 2000, these were created by multiple players. Like verified carbon standard was created by non-profits like International Emission Trading Association. Then World Wildlife Fund for Nature was one of the several organizations to start the gold standard. And that has become an opportunity for non-legally binding mechanism for companies who are eager to prove themselves climate friendly. But the main parameters for voluntary standards, even though the standards would differ by specificities with respect to their methodologies, project categories, locations, and so on, the basic cardinal principles of all standards remain same, and those are drawn from the compliance market procedures. That is, all of them have a set of methodologies which are well reviewed and accepted by that given standard. Then these methodologies and these standards are very clear about permanence and additionality, where permanence means the carbon sequester is locked securely for longer period of time, and additionality indicates that the offset would not have taken place without the carbon payments. And they are also very clear about preventing the double counting and leakage through the carbon market carbon projects. So there are various voluntary carbon offset standards with diversified portfolios such as Vera, Plan Vivo, Gold Standard. But many of these projects are largely going on in the South American and African contexts, and India specific, or I would bit more say South Asia specific methodologies are bit difficult in these given standards, because the projects are still in an emerging stage in South Asia per se. There is a huge transaction that is happening in a sense in 2017-18 around. There is a 3 times jump in terms of volume transacted between 17-18, and then 18 onwards the situation has remained more or less fluctuating, but it has not touched the bottom level of 2017. It is still twice or thrice 3 times higher than the 2017 volume of million ton of CO2 equivalent transacted in the voluntary carbon sector. As we were talking about the spread, the 43% of existing voluntary carbon market projects for AFOLU sector are in South America and 28% in Asia. There is lack of any common dashboard for this, but there is an international database on REDD plus projects. It's called IDRECO, and that is providing a very valuable information about the status of voluntary carbon market projects, especially in AFOLU sector. So if we quickly have a overview of that, then afforestation, reforestation tops and REDD projects, they top the AFOLU sector. Then the humid ecosystems are one of the significant ecosystems which have been addressed under AFOLU projects. And biodiversity conservation and climate mitigation means, again, supporting ARR and REDD are the significant objectives of the carbon market projects. And so far, 1.4 billion carbon credits are generated by the voluntary sector projects in forestry sector. As we are talking about in Indian scenario, or 53% out of the 2025 projects which are in India, 53% projects are contributed solely by Uttar Pradesh and in smaller proportion by other states in the country. The carbon market projects directly contribute to more than 10 to 12 SDGs and indirectly contribute many of the remaining sustainable development goals, which is a very critical aspect. And they also are important in the larger context of drivers of forest degradation in India, where the traditional drivers which have been there in a consistent manner, which is a bit unfortunate, but unsustainable extraction of firewood, uncontrolled grazing, and NTFP collection. The recent ISFR 2021 also highlights more than 22% forest cover as a fire prone in the country, and also identifies specific states such as Uttarakhand, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim as vulnerable for impacts of climate change. Dr. Sharma has already talked about the number of projects which are being handled by TERI in agroforestry as well as REDD parlance. So I would prefer not to repeat these details. The key questions, as Pablo was also highlighting some of the issues, that how will Paris Agreement is help in development and promoting of domestic forestry carbon markets and registry platforms? What is government's perspective on future of forest carbon market in India, their role, any constraints and other aspects? How voluntary carbon markets can contribute towards carbon neutrality? How forest carbon can be treated as one of the ecosystem services from the natural forest, and what role multilaterals and bilaterals need to play for forest carbon markets? I stop at this stage and open the pass on the details mic to the chair for further discussion. Thanks a lot.
Comments? We can have a question and answer session when all the 6 panelists have spoken. Ms. Anna, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I would first like to thank the organisers and the distinguished speakers earlier today for this starting us off on this topic. So I work for the Sustainable Landscape Management Programme in Indonesia, and I think some of the interesting issues that have been raised in the discussions already today relate to nature-based solutions, ecosystem services, and bringing these together through a landscape approach to basically generate climate finance. And I wanted to say a few words about our Sustainable Landscape Management Programme, because I think it offers an excellent example where a landscape approach, which was mentioned by colleagues at the World Bank, can be linked to payments and clear climate finance mechanisms for countries. So our Sustainable Landscape Management Programme takes a landscape approach. The landscape approach to supporting deforestation and reducing forest degradation involves taking a cross-sectoral approach involving sectors, involving land, looking at land classification, land tenure, looking at the socio-economic conditions, and also looking at specific techniques and issues that can address issues of deforestation. So deforestation, forest degradation. So our program brings together multiple different strands through technical assistance, investment, and projects. And one of the examples where this is actually actualized and how it really works on climate finance and links to climate finance is we are working on a project, mangroves rehabilitation project, which takes a landscape approach. Essentially, the government of Indonesia has set out very ambitious plans in their forest sector to support turning the sector into a fully net sink by 2030. These proposals were announced last autumn at COP26. As part of this ambition, the government of Indonesia's national mangrove program looks to rehabilitate over 600,000 hectares of mangroves. Mangroves, Indonesia is an archipelagic nation, and mangroves are a hugely important coastal ecosystem, not just for the environment, but also for the communities that live in and around them and benefit from ecosystem services and need to access the ecosystem services that mangroves provide. Now, as part of the National Mangroves program, as I mentioned, the government of Indonesia is looking to rehabilitate over 600,000 mangroves, and we are working to support the government of Indonesia to integrate, to take an integrated landscape approach to this target, and basically look at how to design a program that can involve communities in the rehabilitation and in achievement these targets, and how the communities can receive payments for the services that the mangroves ecosystem, once rehabilitated, would be able to provide. Where this links to climate finance, sort of jumping from taking a landscape approach to climate finance, is that there's a huge opportunity for blue carbon payments here. There's a huge opportunity to monetize these ecosystem services and ensure that they can be be turned into carbon credits, and countries can decide whether they would like to sell those credits or use them towards their NDCs. So I think it's quite important to take a holistic approach in the forest sector to look at how are the different approaches that can be applied. For example, a landscape approaches to different types of restoration projects. There can be sort of a red line from these targets to actually accessing climate finance and creating a positive cycle where these regions and countries can monetize the benefits that accrue. This project is currently being prepared. The government of Indonesia is interested in accessing IBRD lending to basically scale this project up, starting with 4 large provinces in Indonesia. I want to also, I can come back later a little bit to discuss about the carbon finance and carbon pricing instruments specifically, and how they link to the forest sector. This is, of course, very crucial topic. Before going to that, one of the other key points I want to highlight is the importance and the role that the multilaterals and we can play in making sure that it's the communities that can access the benefits from whether it's climate finance or whether it's the money that money from ecosystem services, benefits from ecosystem services that our projects can generate. And at the heart of our approach in Indonesia has been looking at how the funds will be flowing to communities and making sure that the benefits are shared directly to the communities who work and support the rehabilitation efforts, restoration efforts, and so that we create this positive cycle, not only from a government's perspective of being able to generate climate finance and revenues, carbon revenues, but also from the community's perspective. So these nature-based solutions can then result in sort of a positive cycle, positive incentives for communities to engage in the restoration and rehabilitation of their environment, while also increasing and improving their livelihoods. So this has been part of our approach that we've been working with the government of Indonesia here. And there has been discussions with the communities have been extremely positive, and this approach has been welcomed by local businesses and local communities. And in fact, today there is another consultation to engage communities on this debate and ensure that they are part of the solution. So perhaps I'll stop here. I'd be interested to hear other colleagues and other panelists to come in on this discussion on the role of nature-based solutions and climate finance.
Thank you very much, Anna, for telling us about the interesting work you have done. in Indonesia and how things can be taken forward. I now request the next panelist, Anupam Joshi from the World Bank, to share his thoughts.
Thank you. And I join my colleague Piyush in thanking all the panelists in the inaugural session. I think they set the tone about the very important topic that we are discussing today. Picking from where my colleague Anna from Indonesia office left, and linking what my other colleague Pablo had initially outlined, the key message that ignoring natural services or natural ecosystem services will not be good for sustaining world economy. And I think if we link it with the incentives that raising forests or raising sequestering carbon in agroforestry, etc., can provide the benefits to communities, which my colleague Anna just touched upon, could be a very, very effective nature-based solution going forward. I believe that everyone has a role to play. And speaking, from the World Bank perspective, of course, we are a development partner for our, partner countries. An important aspect of that is to bring investments. However, just money on the table is not going to, serve. Also, the needs and the demands are so much that one single institution or even a combination of a few may not be adequate. What we really need is to bring in the required technical capacity building mechanisms in place, use our funding in a catalytic manner, create networks. We all, hear and talk about the role of private sector, and as Mr. Goyal in his inaugurating comments touched upon the possibilities of green bonds, which is mentioned in the budget for this year. And also, if you look at this year's economic survey, it has a whole section, chapter dedicated to climate change and green financing. These are the, levers that we need to collectively build upon and utilize. I think the sources, there are out there a lot of area available, which has already been also mentioned by Shri Goyal on the TERI's recent report. But also, if you look at the IPCC and UNFCCC special report, they talk about bringing at least 1 billion hectares under forestry in the world, which is very, very critical to keep the world within 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, all that is not going to happen in the designated forest areas. We have a lot of scope in India. For example, we have almost like 10% of our forest cover, which is about 7 to 9 million hectares, under open forest category. These are areas where we can substantially improve the forest quality. However, this would not be sufficient, especially when we are going to a scenario where India has declared its intention to be carbon neutral by 2070. So trees outside forest has to be one of the pillars of our approach. And truly speaking, investments in improving forest quality, improving forest are actually investments in multiple benefits. Ecosystem services, to say a few, coastal protection through mangroves, watershed services, pollination, which Pablo showed in his economic model that the bank has carried out recently. So there are very, very good examples. But what I think is, as we are gathered today, TERI is spearheading a lot of good work in this direction. Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is opening up to new ideas and expanding their ongoing programs into much larger and reformed versions. I think we are sitting at some great opportunities. We need to come together and create a coalition on carbon. When we talk about India's carbon neutrality, we know that there are certain sectors like transport, like energy, where we have possibilities of getting maximum gains. But a lot of things happen at the state. Today, we don't have a state level sort of coalition or alliance wherein from different sectors, whether it's forestry or energy sectors, where we talk about transitioning the economic development of states into a more carbon neutral pathway. I believe that carbon finance could be a very, very effective instrument to bring the states together. While there is voluntary markets available, I think there is tremendous potential within India to have a domestic market. Our industry need to reduce. We need to talk about carbon credits. We can introduce new and novel approaches like biodiversity credits to get premium over the carbon credits. So I think the scale of innovation, the possibilities of doing something at a big scale which has global impact. Those choices that India will make are going to have a global impact in the fight against addressing climate change. So I will stop for now, and if there are opportunities during question and answer session, I will like to contribute more. But in the interest of time, let me say that we are looking at a great opportunity. We need to leverage, convene, coalesce with each other, and create an ecosystem within the, with tapping on the domestic financing itself to take the carbon financing and carbon markets through sequestration using trees to the next level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anupam. I agree with you. It's a very complex issue which we are tackling, and a multi-institutional approach is required. It's not, it's beyond the capacity of a single institution or a single organization to take things forward. I request the next panelist, Mr. Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, to give his views.
Thank you, Mr. Negi, and thank you for TERI for having me here. It's really a pleasure being here and listening to this discussion, which is quite important. I think Anupam mentioned that carbon finance could be a major source of revenue. I would say that it is already quite a big source of revenue in the nature-based space. The work that we have been doing, and TERI is one of our partners as well, is to understand how the private sector voluntary carbon markets can interact with the institutional mechanism at the sovereign level. And that, I think, is quite an interesting piece, because I think the public sector and the voluntary carbon markets have been operating into silos, and I think it's time to bring them together, because I do think you can increase the effectiveness of programs based on that kind of a blended approach. Just as a background, of course, I think the importance of nature-based has been spoken about at length. I think it's a people approach first, and I think we all agree on that. I think we categorize the communities at the nature level as first responders, in fact, rather than calling them the vulnerable. So I think these are the guys who really face the brunt of climate change. Anna mentioned about coastal forestry. Coastal communities battle with not just degradation, but cyclones, typhoons, the whole works, really. So I think it is a development angle that we're taking, and we should be taking. And in the nature space, talk about the quality of the biodiversity rather than things like forest cover and carbon estimation. I think we all have to understand that the quality of the forest is more important than just tree cover. And I think that's the ecosystem valuation play that we also need to understand. There's a differential there, and that also needs to be valued. I think the private sector, and I am a representative of the private sector, and we've been able to raise significant amount of money and capex funding for nature-based on the back of voluntary carbon markets, which is when I say significant, because this is mostly money that goes down directly to CBOs, joint liability groups, self-help groups, etc. Which then brings me to the point of, we have two different, and this is a large bucket funding that we're talking about. I mean, you mentioned Indonesia, and that's interesting because I wanted to talk about the blended approach. Now, we are also working in Indonesia, where we've signed off on very large projects on mangrove restoration. Now, you are also doing the same, right? So how can we interact with each other? We are providing the capex funding. It's not a grant, it's not an equity. It's a capex funding to make the project work from a shovel perspective or shovel stage. So that's something that's interesting, and it's something that we're doing in Nepal, Bangladesh, India as well, and TERI is helping us quite a bit with that. So my point basically is that there is a voluntary carbon market. Whether it be domestic, international, we'll have to see how this pans out.
There is significant amount of funding available. How do we make it more effective on a PPP basis, where the PPP, the private party, becomes the community, is what I mean. So if that is the case, I think there can be very large scale amount of funding that goes in. And like Anupam mentioned, money on the table is not the only thing that we should look forward to. Greater plans at the policy level, at the governance level. I think governance of the nature-based projects is quite a crucial point. While we can have the millions and the billions on the table, I think the way the money is spent is something that's really important to look at. And I think that's where bilaterals, multilaterals can come in, because there are frameworks needed. I know we have some principles, but given the enormity of the work that's going on right now, I think we will need a lot more work on those frameworks and to make sure that the maximum benefit of these ecosystem-based payments. And these ecosystem-based payments need to be broken down to two buckets. One is at the capex level and one is at the O&M incentive level. I think because otherwise what happens is when we talk about ecosystem-based payments only at a result base, there is a lack of funding at the initial stages. And that's where I think the two financing solutions can interact with each other. And we have some live cases where we're doing this with a few governments, trying to figure that out. And I think that's really important for us to understand that all of us, like I said, it's a multi-institutional platform, should be. But all of us need to put our heads together, because really it's the enormity of the task at hand, or 1 billion hectares under management is quite large, but it's achievable. I think the capital is around, the deployment, the willingness to deploy is around. I think we just need to figure out the policy framework within which has to happen, and with integrity, with the financial governance part, and community first. I mean, I think all of us agree to that. That's something we need to always keep in mind. We also need to keep in mind the institutional mechanisms that the sovereigns have to govern that fund. It's always very, very important. Govern not just the fund, the project in itself. And that's where I think all these private, civil society can put their heads together and to really, really make it work. Because I don't think in today's world, the money is the problem. I think the problem is more on the implementation side. For us, for example, we find the dearth of investable projects, so to speak, and that's something that's becoming a problem. And so how can we put our heads together to get that pipeline going, and then get communities involved, get more ownership in, look at the drivers, take them head on. We know the drivers for degradation. It's been around for years now. Look at buffer zones, look at community-based alternative livelihoods, and try and figure this out a little bit, because just one company, one party cannot solve this problem. So I'll stop there and over to the chair again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep, for highlighting the challenges which we are facing in this sector today and how things can be taken forward. Now I request the next panelist, Mr. Ashish Tiwari from the UP Environment Department, to give his views, please.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you very much, sir.
Yes, please. Yes, Tiwari.
Yes, sir. I will, as you all have seen, that UP being Uttar Pradesh being a state, we don't call UP a state, it's a country because of its population and the multiplicity of the drivers in the state of Uttar Pradesh. The challenges, the opportunities, and the work which has already been done in the state of Uttar Pradesh might as well reflected in the presentation of Mr. Gokhale, that under ARCDM projects, UP shares the half of the plate in India. Agroforestry is being a long history in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and it's a very successful model starting from the early 80s, and it has really catered to the needs of the people living over here. But now this is an era of transition wherein the Ujjwala schemes, Ujjwala Plus schemes are coming in. and now we have more availability of fruits of agroforestry towards production side. The best part of the agroforestry market is that it is picking up, and the demand side driver is gaining strength day by day. There is a huge demand of agroforestry based wooden products. The state of Uttar Pradesh is of course struggling on the front of the on-site value addition of agroforestry produce, but we hope to resolve that. It's already in some kind of a legal this thing. We hope to resolve it very soon. In a nutshell, I want to say that there is a UP being leading in the field of agroforestry. The state of forest report statistics also throws light on that. The tree outside forest country average is 2.91% of geographical area, but UP has much more than that. That is 3.08% of country's geographical area under trees outside forests, and UP ranks at 11th number in the list of states, despite UP is having most of the area covered under urban and peri-urban area. The agroforestry, the carbon financing co-benefits of agroforestry is definitely going to give a very high drive to further upscale the agroforestry initiatives in the state of Uttar Pradesh. It's an additionality so far which our state has understood in collaboration with VNV and TERI, that it's going to be an additionality, and this benefit we would be able to transfer to our farmers. So whenever there is an additional kind of a benefit, then definitely the agroforestry will be upscaled. We have a very high potential, because if you go by the National Wasteland Atlas, we have about 8 to 9% area as a wasteland in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and for that also, as rightly pointed out by our eminent speaker from VNV, that quality of our nature-based interventions is a major issue now. It's not that what profit we are going what monetary profit we are going to harness out of that, but quality also. So UP has also devised and started following the Miyawaki technique of forestation, wherein we bring back the natural species in very small natural forests in a very less time, in a small piece of lands which are available in peri-urban settings. There also the studies are such that although they bring back the natural forest in small patches in urban areas, but the sequestration of carbon, because it's a multi-story kind of a ecosystem, the carbon sequestration is very high. We have taken up a study also how much carbon above ground, below ground it sequesters as compared to our conventional this thing. So for community and wastelands, we have a choice of Miyawaki forestation, and UP is a state which has developed standard operating procedures and for Miyawaki forestations, and all in all districts we are having one demonstration plot for upscaling Miyawaki intervention. Sandeep rightly pointed out that there has to be a kind of linkage between industries and the forestation. UP is also a state of industries. We have more than 30,000 industries. The UP government was also took a very visionary step in making mandatory the 33% area of the industry as a green belt, and if area is not available with the industry, then Miyawaki technique has been mandated, wherein at least number of trees which are to be planted can be done in a small piece of land. So these are kind of intervention in which opportunities in which state is looking forward, and definitely the scope for agroforestry. One more very pertinent issue about, we have a large area under Bundelkhand and Vindhyan tracts, which is in the southern part of the state of Uttar Pradesh, bordering state of Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh. Those areas are basically rocky plateaus, and they are having arid conditions. So kind of agroforestry species which can be there, you will find large chunks of land which are non-culturable or even not having any kind of a wood stock over there. So they, in those areas, if appropriate species are tried, then of course it has got very good scope for arid zone agroforestry, and then of course the carbon financing co-benefits to the community and the individual farmers. So these are the areas we are quite hopeful that the state of Uttar Pradesh kind of settings which state is having, and we have already devised our strategy to contribute the sub-regional contribution of state of Uttar Pradesh towards national determined contributions in the way which I was talking about, through Miyawaki, forestation, agroforestry, etc., etc. So I'm quite hopeful that carbon financing, and of course the green bond also the state is exploring, because we have understood that the strength of green bonds, sovereign green bonds, is that we can refinance our initiatives which have already been taken up. You must be aware that in last 5 years, UP has planted about 1 billion trees, and of those 1 billion, about 50 lakhs, half of that is outside forest area. So these are the very huge opportunities, and of course we are very willing to collaborate to convert these opportunities into the strength of the state. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashish, for telling us about the initiatives being taken by the state of Uttar Pradesh. And I'm sure the nice work which you are doing there can be replicated elsewhere in the country. Now I request the next panelist, Dr. Jv Sharma, to give his views.
Thank you, sir. If I look into the context of the India, the 88 policy mandated to achieve 33% forest and tree cover. At present, we have 24.63, out of which 21.72 from forest cover and 2.91 is the tree cover. There is a gap of 8.38% of the land area. Now the question arises as to how we can reduce this gap and achieve the target of 33%. There is a scope of improving the quality of forest by involving the forest dependent communities, but the larger scope lies with the tree outside forest category, where 29% growing stock at present lies, and tree outside forest plays a pivotal role in meeting more than 80% wood and wood products demand of the country, while natural forests facilitate around 6%, and the rest of the demand, around 12 to 13%, is met from the import of wood and wood products. So that how much important the agroforestry and farm forestry and the tree grown outside forest is important. The scope of achieving 33% target, forestry NDC, livelihood of the forest dependent communities and the farmers' income lies with the growing more trees and using more trees in tree outside forest category. The question is how we can motivate farmer to grow more trees outside forest, particularly on their farmland under the agroforestry. The central government and the state government have taken many measures such as relaxing policies and regulatory regime for the tree grown outside forest, enhancing import and duty on wood and wood products that creates a better market for the wood and wood products in the country, and research and development for producing quality planting material. However, these efforts are not enough to motivate farmers. Of course, farmers is planting trees for their economic gain. After Paris Agreement and particularly COP26, the carbon market has surged, and large number of the global and national companies have taken the policy decision to become carbon neutral. Some companies by 2030, some by 2040, and some by 2050. And at the national level, India has also have taken the carbon neutral by 2070. These companies are required to buy carbon credits and from the carbon market to offset their emissions. After the expiry of Kyoto Protocol, the status of the compliance market is under discussion, thereby leading to the emergence of voluntary carbon market. And of course, I am repeating, I have mentioned in my welcome remarks also, that we are implementing more than 10 projects of the carbon finance. And when we are interacting with the state governments and the state farmers and the frontline staff of the state forest department, and we are finding very, very big gap, that is the capacity building. We have to build the capacity. I will request, and I am requesting Mr. C.P. Goyal, Director General Forest, and Mr. Ashish Tiwari, Secretary Forest and Environment, State of Uttar Pradesh, that we should have more and more programs of the building capacity of the farm, not only the farmers of selected farmers, also for the carbon stock assessment. As I am mentioning that from the first cycle we are with the state forest department and the farmers to prepare their monitoring report and getting the credits in their accounts. But what will happen the second cycle and third cycle and the fourth cycle? Definitely the capacity building and experience is very, very key and important. As Dr. Yogesh Gokhale has mentioned that half of the projects in India are from Uttar Pradesh, and Mr. Tiwari also, Secretary for Forest of UP, also mentioning that. But the same problem arises at that point of time in the state of Uttar Pradesh, that how to take advantage of the second cycle. So that capacity building is very, very key. We have the training institutions at the state level, training institution at the central government level, and Forest Survey of India is a key agency in a country for devising methodologies for the carbon stock assessment or many aspects of the taking carbon finance, so that we can make use of the knowledge and the technical knowledge generated by the Forest Survey of India. Forest Survey of India is not beyond their scope. And beyond their, it is not possible to build the capacity of the whole country. There's huge human resource available as far as forest department and those stakeholders are involved in the carbon finance mechanism. So that is Forest Survey of India, in my opinion, must be the overarching body to look after the how the and develop the technology and training capsules and other build the capacity of the different institutions in the country. Maybe more than 20, 30, 40 institutions will be able to impart the training and the building capacity of such a huge human resource, so that maybe some private institutions, maybe some government institutions. So this is a very, very important aspect what we are realizing at this point of time while implementing more than 10 projects in the country. We are building capacity, but we are not to that extent that they will be able to prepare the monitoring report and they will carry forward the legacy for the second cycle or the third cycle. So this is a very key and important aspect, and we must keep in our mind that we should invest some resources. Resources are available with state government also, with central government also. So we should channelize the resource for building capacity of the frontline staff and including of selected farmers. And in the last, I will mention that mm, uh, right now we are approaching the voluntary carbon market. If there is a national level registry is available and the government of India or the state government, they go for the carbon neutrality policy, as the Director General has mentioned rightly, that definitely it will create a market at the local level, and definitely more and more forest dependent communities and more farmers will be able to able to take advantage of the carbon finance if the carbon neutrality policy at the national level is in place. Forests and trees directly contributes, I'm repeating again, that achieving SDG 5, 13, 14 and 15, and the indirectly 1, 2, 8 and 10 and 12 and 17, and adopting the carbon neutrality policy definitely will facilitate in achieving the forestry NDC 33% target of the national forest policy 88, and also the draft policy which is which is under the process of the approval at the government of India level, and will also ensure the achievement of the sustainable development goal and climate change mitigation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jv Sharma, for highlighting various issues, particularly about capacity building, because that is a major constraint in expanding the tree cover and major constraint in accessing the voluntary carbon market. I now request the last panelist, Mrs. Meenakshi Joshi from the Forest Survey of India, to give her views. Meenakshi.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, TERI, for inviting FSI. As we all know, we released our latest ISFR a month back in January, on January 2013. And the results indicate this is a biennial publication, and we carry out remote sensing based forest cover mapping and also collection of a lot of valuable information through our inventory, field based inventory exercise. Our results, our findings also indicate that though there has been a total increase of 1,540 square kilometer of forest cover in the country, but out of this, the bulk of the increase to the extent of 98% has been in the trees outside forest. That is 1,509 square kilometer forest cover has increased in the trees outside forest area, and only 31 square kilometer in the recorded forest area, which we can call as in which the reports, the newspaper reports and other reports, they are calling as the natural forest or the real, so-called real forest. So we see that action now, the future action, the current action and the future action in terms of increase in the forest cover is going to happen in the trees outside forest area. We also do the inventory based analysis of the growing stock, which is the volume of the material that is present in our forest resources. And there also we find that up to 30% of the growing stock is in the trees outside forest area, and which is very significant because it is meeting the fodder, fuel woods, small timber requirements of our communities. And if you add the tree cover also, which includes the patches which are less than, as per the methodology that FSI is following, the patches which are less than 1 hectare. Because a lot of our trees, we are having trees in our agriculture bunds, the plantations along canals, along roads. So these together, the forest cover and tree cover, they are presenting the real picture. So as I mentioned, the bulk of the increase in the forest cover has happened in the trees outside forest area, which is now constituting up to 36% of the total forest cover. So now, as my previous esteemed speakers have also mentioned, that the direction of the forest cover is going to be in the trees outside forest areas. The DGF has also mentioned that there are constraints in further increase, in the recorded forest area, because the land is limited, and also the challenge there is to increase the quality of the forest. We find that there is a modest increase in the very dense forest. However, the moderately dense forest has declined. has decreased and the open forest has increased. So then there are degradation issues, and then there are issues of forest fires. We have also done computer-based modeling studies, and there is a dedicated chapter on climate hotspots in 3 scenarios: 2030, 2050, and 2085. We are also seeing that in 2050 and 2085, up to 99% of our forest cover areas will be affected by climate change. And the central India, the northeastern part, which is in this time also the maximum decrease in the forest cover has been in this region. The northwestern part, the northern part of the Western Ghats, they would be struggling. They will be very highly impacted with climate change. There will be decrease in there will be increase in temperatures, and then there will be a deficient rainfall, precipitation will decrease. So there are a lot of challenges to further increase in the forest cover. Degradation is going to be a big challenge. So the major, I think, scope for further increase in the trees outside forest area. Secretary UP sir has also mentioned how states like UP, and then we have done special projects for UP. Then Bihar, we are seeing that states which are having a less quantity of the reserve forest areas, they are doing a very good job in terms of increasing the forest cover in outside the recorded forest area. Bihar, we are seeing they have done very good plantations. Then UP also, sir, we did an assessment of the this Vriksh Mahakrum you had, sir. The FSI was roped in for doing a monitoring survey, sir. Then we found the results are very good, sir. Then similarly, Rajasthan also, sir, they are doing good job in trees outside forest area. So I think the future action in terms of increasing the forest carbon is going to be in the trees outside forest areas and where land is there. And now, but there's going to be a lot of challenges also. Over the years, sir, I have also worked in World Bank projects, and then also been part of one of the biocarbon project that was being developed for the Uttarakhand, but eventually the project was implemented in Himachal Pradesh. So then at the same time, over the years, small projects have been implemented in other states like Haryana, Himachal Pradesh. But I feel now that the communities are also now prepared. They are also ready to embrace such projects of carbon financing, sir. But the challenges will be because preparing these projects are very technically challenging. So I think the institutional mechanisms have to be developed to provide support to our small farmers, community groups, so that they can not only prepare the projects, run the projects, and provide them all the support and also the financing, sir. So these are going to be the future challenges, sir. And yes, sir. These are some of the findings and my views on this topic, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Meenakshi, for giving us the national perspective and also sharing a lot of data on the latest ISFR.
Thank you, sir.
We have time for a few question and answer session. I request if there are any questions or there are any more interventions, the floor is open.
If I can ask one question.
Yes, please.
Thanks. Sandeep, my question relates to you. We have a project where the community-led ecosystem management is being taken care, and most of the work is community-led, and it's also getting leverage from other government programs like Manrega and other. Now the question next is that we can orient communities towards NRM, but then sustain it with other market mechanism for their livelihood is a big question. So is there this mechanism which you on the voluntary market you're sharing with us has relevance for such kind of projects? I'm talking about Northeast, where the rights are with communities, in the forest.
Absolutely. Regardless of where the rights lie, actually, as long as it is very clear where the rights lie, I think it is possible. And in fact, that is one of the big pluses of these kind of private sector financing, which is then can, like I say, you are talking with Manrega, which is another source of funding, so it can blend in quite well. I think that's a perfect case study, and especially for the Northeast, in fact, it'll be quite a good project as well, actually. We're doing something as well with a few forest departments, which are case studies of that. So if it's community land, nothing like it.
Any other intervention by any other panelists? Yes, please. Dr. Jv Sharma.
Yes, sir. For the state of Nagaland and quite in discussion with Sandeep, we have requested state of Nagaland go for the carbon financing for the community conserve area CCAs. And in Nagaland, more than 1,300 village councils are there. They have their own forest. Only 5 to 6% forest is with forest department, rest is with the village councils. And out of 1,300 village councils, we have done a research study, and 407 are the community conserve areas where the communities have taken their own decisions to stop hunting, to stop illicit felling, and they have appointed their own forest guard. And recently in Sukhoi village, village council got an international award of $10,000 equivalent, and for maintaining the community conserve areas. And we have requested principal chief conservator and principal chief conservator have discussed with chief minister of Nagaland, and come out with a positively recent in coming times, within a month or so. Then we will be able to prepare a project for the community 407 community conserve areas where the village councils are ownership lies with the village councils, and villagers are taking interest, and if they could be compensated for their carbon finance and other ecosystem services. We will explore the possibility of the maybe financing through carbon finance, but adding value of the ecosystem services. So let's see how it will work out through a voluntary carbon market mechanism or any other mechanism. We have just conceived this idea, and just we have initiated this effort with the state of Nagaland.
Thank you. I think Ashish, would you like to? Ashish wants to add.
Yeah, I have a very simple, not question, but a suggestion for Meenakshi Madam from Forest Survey of India. It's very good that this year the status of forest report of India has hotspots. This is for the first time, and in fact, it is giving us insight to the like which are the areas where the climate problems will be more. As a way forward, it would be better if we come out with something like climate vulnerability, because as states, the hotspots is based upon the global things, but where we have to intervene is actually what is the preparedness. We need to include some more factors for knowing the vulnerability of those hotspots. So this was a request and a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Would Meenakshi like to respond? I think it's more of a suggestion.
She has left.
She has left. Okay.
Yeah.
So any other panelists, any other participant would like to make any? Anupam?
Yes, if I may. Yeah, thank you, sir. Since I am an ecologist, I wanted to just flag one small thing, and that is it's good to have trees out of forest as our mainstay for carbon sequestration. But at the same time, we need to look at what Pablo presented early on, the ecosystem services. So because the incentive mechanism right now seems to be much more in favor of growing trees outside forest, we should not lose focus on restoring the quality of our other forest, because a lot of ecosystem services that support countries' economic development, whether it is water, pollinators, soil amelioration, etc., is still very, very critical. So I just wanted to flag that part. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anna?
Thank you. I want to, very interesting discussion. I've learned a lot about the state of forest in India as a result of this. I want to come back onto one of the comments Sandeep made about the level of finance available and some of the implications of what the next steps that are needed. I mean, indeed, money is not a problem. And World Bank in the last 5 years committed 83 billion US dollars on climate finance. And the current target of the climate action plan is to increase climate finance investments to be 35% of the portfolio by 2025. The COP26, the Climate Finance Alliance on Net Zero, highlighted that there's over 130 trillion US dollars worth of capital seeking green investments. So there is money. The question is how to channel it effectively. Are there pipelines of credible green projects that are ready and in development and being prepared where this funding can be channeled? Is the monitoring and evaluation of these projects transparent? Is it credible? Does it build trust so as to further increase that level of finance? Are there coordination mechanisms? Secondly, are there coordination mechanisms in place at national level and maybe provincial or state level that enable private and public money or donor money to be brought together, blended towards these projects? Again, that's a question about institutions and whether there's this kind of cross-sectoral institutional collaboration mechanisms that are in place and have to be developed. I mean, what we've seen globally and also in Indonesia, these are some of the really fundamental questions that need to be resolved and supported to be able to leverage strong results. We've been working to support the government to operationalize the Indonesian Environment Fund, which is a national climate finance mechanism, and it's expected to channel billions of US dollars in the next couple of years from multilaterals, also from the private sector, and also from domestic fees and levies. And as part of this process, what we really have seen is that the institutional structure providing this kind of sectoral collaboration platform in Indonesia, this is happening at the national level, but it could be also, these mechanisms also need to be in place at state level, for example, to support jurisdictional emissions reductions programs. These are the sort of really fundamental building blocks that I just wanted to mention that are really a key to have in place and to support, so that this money that is in the system, that is ready, whatever kind of carbon pricing instrument or mechanism that is adopted, but to ensure that this money can be effectively channeled to green projects.
Thank you, Anna. I agree that implementation is a major issue. We will have only two more interventions, Yogesh and Dr. Jv Sharma. Yogesh, please, then we will end the session.
Thank you, sir. In India, there's a huge scope for communities to get involved in this. Currently, we are having two projects in Uttarakhand where we are working with 25 Van Panchayats in two forest divisions, Nainital and Ranikhet. There are 12,000 Van Panchayats in Uttarakhand, out of which around 6,000 Van Panchayats are forested, and they can really take benefit of restoring those Van Panchayats through various natural resource management efforts. Another point is there is 1 million hectare of land that is given as a part of community forest resource right under the Forest Rights Act in India, especially in Central Indian tract. There is a potential of around 30 million hectare being provided to village councils for such management. And these are extremely potential areas where, because not all lands are all forested, even though those are having customary rights of tribal communities. So there is a huge potential of restoring those, linking livelihood and rather strengthening livelihood of local communities in those areas, and also provide them the benefits of carbon finance through various mechanisms. But what is more needed, has been talked about, is the issue of governance, which Sandeep talked about. So strengthening of Gram Sabhas to handle the money that would happen from that would come through such projects, preparation of these projects and handholding them, and most importantly, number of platforms including Vera, Plan Vivo, Gold Standard, they need to have innovative methodologies which cater to the conditions of Indians in or South Asian situations in terms of forest management, forest governance, as well as ecological conditions. So I think that if that happens, then that would also make a conducive environment for national carbon markets in forestry sector to flourish, as well as take proper advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you. Last comment by Dr. Jv Sharma.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Anupam rightly said, and Pablo also rightly said that we have to have the mechanism for payment for ecosystem services. For each and every services, we do not have the different kind of the mechanism. We have developed the community biodiversity climate index for Dudhwa Tiger Reserve and Sariska Tiger Reserve. The carbon value of the Sariska Tiger Reserve is 5 times more than a carbon value of agroforestry plantations, and carbon value of Dudhwa Tiger Reserve is more than 8 times than carbon value of agroforestry plantations. So that there is a need to have a research and studies to develop, because we cannot apply the benefit transfer method in every case, because some are moist forests, some are dry deciduous forests. So the forests are different, and some are mountain forests. So that we have to have the 16 geographic climatic zones in the country, and we have different, at least 16, 17 studies in the country, and we can develop that kind of the indexing, and through a carbon finance we can provide the value of the other ecosystem. So that is quite practically possible to do that. So we have innovated in case of Sariska Tiger Reserve and Dudhwa Tiger Reserve. So can we explore for the many other forest areas which are very rich in biodiversity, and many other PAs and the tiger reserves, etc. That I wanted to share that this could be the mechanism for payment for ecosystem services through the carbon finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jv Sharma. We have all highlighted the challenges faced by this sector, and we all agree to the immense potential which is there. The only issue is how to take it forward. What are the knowledge gaps? What are the capacity gaps? There are a lot of capacity gaps. One aspect which I would stress again is that the income from the voluntary carbon market, income for the local communities, that is very important, especially in sparsely populated areas. We will all agree that almost about 50% of the geographical area of the country is hilly. When we talk about mountains, we only talk about the Himalayan region, or we talk about the northeastern region, but there are many other parts of the country which are hilly, and in the hills the land holdings are very small. So to expect the farmer to plant trees on his entire land is it's a bit is an impossible expectation. We also need to work out mechanisms where the few trees or a group of trees on the bunds, how they can be brought into the voluntary carbon market, and until and unless the money begins to flow to the farmer or to the landholder, it will be very difficult to take the process forward. Number one. Secondly, we are right now looking only at the forest department, but there are other major players, the rural development department, even the railways, there are even the National Highway Authority, there are many other major players in this sector. They all need to be roped in, and that is where the role of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change comes in. It will need to act as an umbrella body, otherwise we will be all working in a small in isolation, and the larger goal would be defeated. So with this, with these words, I thank the organizers, I thank all the panelists for an excellent panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We all have to agree that today's discussion was indeed eye-opening, thoughtful, and interesting. The credit of which goes to a very active team of individuals, starting from Dr. Jv Sharma, who paved the way to the discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. C.P. Goel for explaining and discussing how adopting a carbon neutrality policy is imperative in today's scenario and extending his warm support to the initiatives that one can take in terms of implementing carbon finance project in agroforestry. I would also like to thank Mr. Pablo for discussing in depth about the role of ecosystem services and the prioritizing the role of collaboration for enhancing the functioning of ecosystem services and how ignoring natural ecosystem service is not desirable for the attainment of world's sustainability. I would also like to thank Dr. S.S. Negi for overseeing the panel discussion and Dr. Yogesh Gokhale for his comprehensive presentation. I would like to thank our eminent panelists, which include Ms. Anna, Mr. Anupam, Mr. Sandeep, Mr. Ashish, Dr. Jv Sharma, and Mrs. Minakshi for providing diverse perspectives regarding the topic. And lastly, and most importantly, I would like to thank all our audience for taking out the time and participating in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.